Hello, everyone. This is Fadi. Welcome back to a continuation of this absolutely amazing, possibly even overwhelming to some who is watching it. And it contains a lot of data concerning Mecca, and we called it Mecca in Search of a Place. And this is why we're helping you now in the last at least couple of videos, and today is no exception, in terms of putting it all together and making sense of it. So today we will continue to build up on this notion of the importance of the 7th century as to the alleged rise of a religion called Islam. And today we're going to talk even about the origin of the Arab people, at least the followers of Islam. Yes, Jay.
Okay.
What can we make out of all of this?
Okay, let's go to the slides again, and let's unpack what we're saying. So they need an Arab identity. Now, the Umayyads have been in power since 661 with Muawiyah going, and that's the Sufyani family. Then the Marwanids take over, and they destroy the Sufyani family, and Marwan himself now becomes king. Then he dies, and his son Abd al Malik. And it's Abd al Malik that we know is the great Arab reformer. We all know that. All the history books talk about the great Arab reformer. So this Arab identity is absolutely essential. So how does this happen? The Arabs have been in power since the mid-7th century. Abd al Malik rules politically from 685 to 705 in Damascus, not in Mecca, obviously, we said. The Umayyads had now controlled that part of the world since 661. After 30 years with little identity, they needed this Arab identity. Now, here's the thing. When you look at their cousins, that's us, the Christians and Jews, they already had an identity. Why? Well, because we have a prophetic line. It goes through Isaac. Abraham, Isaac. The Ishmaelites, of which Abd al Malik would be a descendant, the Nabateans are descendants of the Ishmaelites. They go back to Abraham too, but their Abrahamic line goes through Ishmael. Where do you find of anything about Ishmael after Ishmael? All the prophets in the Quran, except for 4 of the 25 prophets, 4 of them we don't know, because if we did more studies, we could probably see who they are. But the 19 of them come from the line of Isaac. And then you have Ishmael and Muhammad. But the other 19 are all from the line of Isaac. So you can see for people like Abd al Malik, he has a problem here. How do you create that identity? You need to have a prophet, right? You need to have a scripture, because they don't have a scripture either. Correct. We have a scripture. The Jews have a scripture. We have the Old and New Testament. And we can trace that all the way back to 1400 BC.
And he would have been aware of the Jews and the Christians, a prophet or prophets, scripture, identity, religious identity in this case. So he was familiar with all of that.
Oh, it gets even worse than that. Remember, as the Nabateans, or who are the Umayyads, as they're conquering all these cities, they don't live in the cities because they're nomadic. The Nabateans are well known as being nomadic. They're the traders that went all the way out to Canton in China. They were traders that used camel. They were camel herders, so they didn't live in cities. Yet they were conquering these cities. The Ghassanids and Lakhmids had helped them defeat and take over these places. Now they needed to have those cities run. How do you run those cities? Well, they didn't know how to do it, so they used Christians and Jews to run their cities. They called them maulas or moalis.
Mawali, yes.
What does that mean?
Well, in this case, the context indicates that they are slaves, or at least paid workers.
What we call indentured servants.
Right.
And they would take on their names. They would take on the names of those who they're indentured to. That's why
Right.
they all take on Arab names.
Right.
So these guys are the ones, but who are they? They're Jews and Christians. And those Jews and Christians that the Arabs dominate, they have an identity that the Arabs don't. There's a jealousy that is created. Mm-hmm. This jealousy with the Jews and Christians, because they have a prophetic line, they have a scriptures, the Arabs did not. This comes to the fore when Abd al Malik comes to power, and he needs to create that identity. So what does he do? Well, let's look and see what history tells us. Let's see where the evidence goes. The first thing he does, well, not the first thing, but soon after he comes to power in 685, he builds a huge building called the Dome of the Rock. Have you been to Jerusalem?
Not myself, hopefully soon.
I've been there. I've been to the Dome of the Rock. You can't help but see it whenever you go to Jerusalem. It sits right there, and you can see it from all over Jerusalem. It's a beautiful building, the largest Arab structure of its day, which is interesting because look and see where it's built. It's built right above where the Temple of Solomon used to be, right up the sanctuary of the Jews, but it looks down upon the Church of the Sepulchre. Look at the picture there, and you'll see the red arrow points to the Church of the Sepulchre, and it's the Church of the Sepulchre where all the Christians went for their pilgrimage.
Right.
Remember, Abd al Malik, for heaven's sakes, if he's going to build such a large structure, why did he do it way down in Petra, where his sanctuary was? Why did he do it in Damascus, where he lived? That's his political capital. Why did he build it in Jerusalem? We're going to get to that. What we do know is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the one that's just been in the news lately, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was not built at that time. People always say the Al-Aqsa Mosque is also as old as the Dome of the Rock. No, it wasn't. The Al-Aqsa Mosque was built in 709. 709, that's the 8th century. And it's built there on the wall. It's on the same citadel as the Dome of the Rock. But the Dome of the Rock does not have a Qibla, whereas the Al-Aqsa Mosque does. But the entire citadel for both the Dome of the Rock, and if you look just to the right of it, you'll see a Dome of the Change, which is the little structure a little over to the right. That is a mosque that was built right after the Dome of the Rock. It does have a Qibla, and the Qibla for the Dome of the Change, or the Mosque of the Change, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the entire structure that's still there today are all facing Petra.
Right.
That's the first thing. But let's move on. Let's move on. The significance of the Dome of the Rock. You ask any Muslim today, why is it important? They say, well, that's where Muhammad was woken up. He went up, he was put on a winged horse called the Buraq, and he flies from Mecca all the way up to Jerusalem, and then he goes up to the 7 heavens, meets Allah, comes back down to the 5th heaven, meets Moses, and he bounces back and forth, getting the prayers from 50 down to 5, and then Moses, that's enough, so he comes back down to the Dome of the Rock. Or the Rock, the Dome hadn't been built that time when Moses was living, obviously, in 1400 BC, and flies back to Mecca. That's why they say it's important. Now, before we get into that and debunk that, let's just look and see what we now know. We know that it employs Byzantine architecture. It also is much larger and more prominent than any other building of its day. It sits down, looking down on top of the Church of the Sepulchre. So this is a one-upmanship against the Jews and the Christian. In this case, the Christian, the Byzantine Christian, because that's their pilgrimage site. It is situated on the holiest city for the Jews and Christians, who are their cousins through Abraham. But it should be in Damascus or Mecca. It's not. They say, the Muslims today say that it's to commemorate the Miraj. That's that night journey. If that is the case, if it's there to commemorate the Miraj, then something should be said about it. It should be on the inscriptions. See, here's the beautiful thing about the Dome of the Rock. It has inscriptions on the inner ambulatories. What are the inner ambulatories? Let's take a look at them. There's the inner ambulatories where the 2 green arrows are forking. You see where the 2 green arrows are?
Right.
That's the only original part of the building. That building has been destroyed and rebuilt 11 times, but those 2 ambulatories have remained since 691, since the late 7th century. So we need to look at those ambulatories because they have inscriptions on them. There you can see where the arrows are pointing. Those are the inscriptions on the inner ambulatories. Look at them. They're written in Arabic. Take a look at what they say. There is nothing at all about the Miraj on any of those inscriptions. What do they say? Well, O people of the Scripture, do not exaggerate your religion. Jesus, son of Mary, was only a messenger. So believe in Allah and His messenger. Say not 3, cease. For it is removed, far it has been removed from His transcendent majesty that He should have a son. Who's that attacking? Is that talking about the Miraj? That's attacking Jesus. That's attacking His divinity. That's attacking the Trinity. That's attacking His sonship. That is attacking Byzantine Christianity.
Right.
Can you look at the other one? Surah chapter 17, verse 111. Hath not taken unto himself a son, this is about God, who hath no partner. That's attacking the divinity of Jesus. That's also found in chapter 5, verse 72 of the Quran. Nor hath he any protecting friend through dependence. Let's continue on. Chapter 112 is there on the Dome of the Rock. He has no associate. Again, that's attacking Jesus' divinity, is attacking Byzantine Christianity. He begetteth not, nor was begotten. That's attacking John 3:16. None comparable unto him. So here they attack Jesus, attack His divinity, attack His Trinity, and then they introduce Muhammad is the messenger of God.
And by the way, if this was intended to represent chapter 112, Surah 112, then there is a variant reading here because the actual chapter does not include the name of Muhammad in it.
That's something for another time.
Right.
We're going to have to unpack that.
Right.
Here's what's fascinating. Even if it did include Muhammad, because we do know that Muhammad's on the coins in 692, we also know that Muhammad's on the Caliph protocols in 691, and Muhammad is there on the Dome of the Rock. What does Muhammad mean in Arabic?
Well, I mean, you can look at it I know it's been taken as a name, but you can look at it as an adjective here describing someone, saying that the praised one.
The praised one is the messenger of God.
Right.
So even in that context, Murad, who has come to unpack that and said, if you look at it from the Aramaic, the original Aramaic, Arabic, you can see Nabatean Aramaic, it actually is not referring to a man named Muhammad. It's actually possibly referring to Abd al Malik. It's referring to himself. He saw himself as a messianic figure. That would make sense in why he puts that on the coins. That would make sense in why he puts it on the Dome of the Rock. That would make sense in why he puts it on the protocol. Now, Jay Smith, in June of 2021, I'm not going to take a position on that. I still believe it is Muhammad. I think he is now introducing his prophet at this time. This is where I'm saying in June. I may have to change my mind as new material and new evidence is uncovered. But I still believe that this is probably really is the man Muhammad. Nonetheless, this is the first time we see Muhammad's name anywhere.
Right.
The first time we see Muhammad's name anywhere. So we get to the Caliphal protocols. So we've got them on the Dome of the Rock. Let's move to the Caliphal protocols. When you get to the Caliphal protocols, you're now beginning to see the Sufyani period from 661 to 680. The protocols, fascinating. When you look at the protocols, this is Yehuda Menu. What's his first name? Dr. Yehuda Neville. Dr. Yehuda Neville that I pictured in earlier when we went through all the major players. Yeah. He is the one that really has unpacked the inscriptions. And he's looked at the Caliphal protocols, which are still in existence today. You can still see them. And when you look at the Caliphal protocols, which is fascinating because everything else has been destroyed, not the Caliphal protocols, you can see that they do mention, there's no reference on any of these protocols to a religion called Islam. There is no reference on any of these protocols from the Sufyani period up until the Marwanid period for any people called Muslims. There's no reference to any person called Muhammad. There's no reference to any book called the Quran on any of these Caliphal protocols. When you get into the Marwanid protocols, starting with Marwan and going up to Abd al Malik, same thing. Until 691. That's 60 years after Muhammad's dead. In 691, he says, almost overnight, it happens almost overnight, suddenly Muhammad's name is introduced in the protocols. And the Shahada, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, that is introduced. The first time you see it on the protocols is 691. The first time you see it on the coins is 691. The first 692. The first time you see it on the Dome of the Rock is 691. And this continues from then on. It's like overnight it is introduced. What does that tell you? Well, I suggest that tells me, if you see his book, Yehuda Neville on Crossroads to Islam, that is all unpacked. Get the book, read it, and you'll be surprised by what you find from it. So now, let's look at the coins. When you look at the coins, you need to look and see, here you have the Byzantine dinar. I'm pointing it there. Look at the arrows. You can see there's Heraclius there with his two sons on either side, and they're holding cross. They have crosses on their orb, and they have crosses on their head, proving that they are Christians. On the back side of the coin, you see the Byzantine cross. So these are the gold solar discs from that time. When you get to the Sufyani period, now this is Mu'awiyah. There is Cave Mu'awiyah. Look at him. He is on the coin. This is a copper coin. And what's above his head, and what's he holding in his hand? A cross. It looks like Mu'awiyah is a Christian, right? By the time we get to Abd al Malik then, the crosses are taken off, and Abd al Malik then replaces it with his own image, holding a sword, because he now is going to war. And he's going to war against the Byzantines. On the backside, he does a deformation. He's a mockery of the Byzantine cross. He's mocking the Byzantines. And the Shahada is then introduced. Actually, it's introduced to a coin before that. This is from 693. The coin before that was 692. Then you get to the 696 coins by Abd al Malik, and he takes his image off. He takes the image off of the mockery of the Byzantine cross, and he only has scripts, Arabic script. This is the Arabic script that is introduced in 696. And this Arabic script, almost every one of it, is attacking Jesus Christ. It's attacking his divinity, it's attacking the Trinity, it's attacking his sonship, and it's introducing Muhammad as now their Arab prophet. Can you see the coins follow the Dome of the Rock, follow the protocols? The need for a man. We knew that Abd al Malik introduces here his Arab identity in the guise of an Arab prophet. Beginning with the Dome of the Rock in 691, it's larger than any other non-Arab structure. It's facing the Arab sanctuary, Petra, not Mecca. It incorporates inscriptions against Byzantine Christianity. It's the Dome of the Rock that introduces the name Islam. It introduces the people Muslim, and it introduces the Prophet Muhammad. I still think it is the Prophet Muhammad he's introducing. The Caliphal protocols that he introduces change overnight in 691 to introduce Muhammad there as well. He mints his coins between 692 and 696, replaces his image and introduces Muhammad on those coins, announces the Shahada on these coins as well as Quranic verses, all attacking Jesus and Christianity. Now they need a book, because they got the man introduced in 691. they got to have a book. Because if you have a prophet, every prophet has a book, right? So, Abd al Malik introduces Muhammad, needs a revelation. The earliest Quranic texts, you notice, the earliest Quranic texts are on the Dome of the Rock. That's 691. The earliest Quranic manuscripts begin to appear during his reign, the lower layer of the Sana'a manuscript, possibly from the last 2 decades of the 7th century. That has yet to be, because nobody wants to put dates on these manuscripts. Everybody's reticent to put dates on these manuscripts.
Well, I mean, the dating basically is not that easy, as you know, because you have to date the ink. So they make attempts by dating the leather itself, the parchment.
And the parchments are when the animal dies.
That's right.
If you're going to use carbon dating. We have yet to get into all that, but that's something we come up to. So let's say late 7th century, the Quranic manuscripts begin to proliferate during the reign of his son Al-Walid. In 705 up to 715, we suddenly see a proliferation. Why is suddenly a proliferation? Because they need a book. And that can you understand? If you need a book, where you get your source material from? Well, you start to grab, borrow. But who do they borrow it from? From the Jews. The difficulty is they got the wrong material. If you look at all the biblical stories in the Quran, take a look and see, not one of them, except for the story of Moses, almost every other story about the biblical prophets are from apocryphal literature. This is what's exciting. And this apocryphal literature is Jewish apocryphal literature in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, up until the Bar Sanhedrin in the 5th century. All of this apocryphal material, but they've got the wrong prophets in those stories. None of the manuscripts that we have today in our hands is complete, and they do not parallel the Quran that we have completely. They continue to be changed and corrected by the later Caliphs up until the 9th century. The Quran is finally canonized at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt in 1924, 97 years ago. We have now, with Dan Brubaker's material, found over 4,000 corrections to the earliest Quranic manuscript, which means they continue to correct them and correct them. How long do they continue to correct them? It didn't happen in the last 100 years. It looks like most of these corrections are happening during the Ottoman period from 1299 on. And finally, there are still currently 30 official different versions of the Arabic Quran. These are known as the Qira'at, that which became and exploded all across the world stage because of that crazy interview that happened between Yasser Qadi and Mohammed Hijab back in June of 2020. So now they need a place. They've got the man, they've got the book, they need a place. They need Mecca. 2 empires compete to create an Arab identity. What are the 2 empires? The Umayyads, who are headquartered way up in Damascus, but have their sanctuary in Petra, destroyed by an earthquake in 713 AD. Thus, a new place is needed. Once you destroy the sanctuary and God's presence is no longer there, you've got to find God's presence. So what do? Well, you follow the black stone. Follow where the black stone is. So Zubair took the black stone, and when he took the black stone, he was taking God's presence with him. So where do the pilgrims go? They start following him.
And not to mention, Petra has been destroyed, right?
It's mentioned that Petra, that is well known because that's documented. The Mecca was possibly chosen by Abd al-Zubair and those from Baghdad and Kufa, the Abbasids, in defiance of the Umayyads in Petra. The Abbasids and Zubair, with their sanctuary in Mecca, then demand allegiance to the surrounding tribes. With the black stone in Mecca, the pilgrims begin to come there as it holds God's presence. That's why Mecca becomes important. Mecca must now replicate the 5 stages of the Hajj that are already previous in Petra, which we're going to soon find also are replicated in Jerusalem maybe before. Now we can see why we have the 4 Qiblas. The 4 Qiblas, you need the 4 Qiblas because the 2 empires are basically fighting each other. In the earliest Qiblas, which are facing Petra, had allegiance to Umayyads, which were headquartered up in Damascus. All those Qiblas facing Mecca are those who allied themselves with the Abbasids, who are up in what is today Baghdad. Back then is called Ctesiphon, and Kufa was where their seminaries were. Al-Hajjaj, who is the governor of Abd al Malik, he also rebels. Like Zubair, he rebels later on in about 706. He rebels. Zubair rebels in 686. Al-Hajjaj rebels in 706, and he then creates this new direction of the Qiblas, which is in between, because he's hedging his bets. He wants to see who's going to end out, who's going to come on top. That's why his Qiblas are directly halfway between Petra and Mecca. Then in North Africa and Andalusia, they don't show allegiance to either empire, so they have their mosques facing parallel to each sanctuary. Thus, they are all groups who are waiting to see which side would gain control before giving their allegiance to either. In other words, they are hedging their bets out of political expediency. When the Abbasids finally overpower the Umayyads in 749, most of the Qiblas then begin to face Mecca, with a few holdouts until 822. after which they all face Mecca up until the present time. Thus, it is clear that these Qiblas were chosen for political purposes and not ineptitude, like David King used to always say, or for religious doctrines like he likes to impose upon. This is because that's why there's only 4 Qiblas, and they're all to do with what's happening on the ground. Now, let's look at a possible scenario. So here's my what-if scenario. You asked me to do this, I'm going to do it. I may have to change it in another year, but this is what I'm saying in June 2021. Now, by the time the Abbasids are in power in 749, the Muslims now have a prophet. His name is Muhammad. By this time, they now, and see, Muhammad's name starts taking on this prophetic mantle around 620s to 630s. That's what we see in the inscriptions. Mm-hmm. The 5 stages of the pilgrimage start to take place in 730. Did I say 630? I meant 720 to 730. Mm-hmm. And then the 5 stages start coming to prominence in 730 to 740. So by 749, when the Abbasids take over, they now have a prophet, his name Muhammad. They now have a revelation, the Quran, because the manuscripts are starting to appear from 705 on, and Mecca is finally chosen in the early 8th century, the early 700s. So now they have the prophet, the revelation, the sanctuary, the book, the man, and the place. They still, however, need a history.
Right. So now they start kicking in, the biography, the sayings of this man.
So the first thing, you need a biography. So who's the first to write it? His name is Ibn Ishaq.
Right.
And they've been in power since 749. He writes this in 765. 765 is the first biography. Mm-hmm. It's full of all kinds of problems because it's still borrowing from a lot of the Umayyad material. So what happens? 70 years later, Ibn Hisham is then commissioned to write the real biography. It takes him 70 years to throw things out, manipulate different material, and also bring in all their nomenclature, and then bring in who this prophet is.
And explains why most of Ibn Ishaq's material may be lost, because they just didn't like the fact that it was built in upon the Umayyads' narrative.
And why is it we don't have Ibn Ishaq's material today? For this very reason. Because the narrative had not yet been canonized. And once you canonize a narrative, that's what Ibn Hisham did in 833, you destroy every evidence that comes before. We see that especially because they even announced that. They make that very clear that they did that with Al-Bukhari. Because once you have the history of this man, then you've got to have the speaking, the sayings, the hadith, the much more prolific material. And that's why Al-Bukhari is given this around 850 to 870. So the last 20 years of his life, he starts producing this. But he throws out 98% and only retains 2%. That is 140 years later. 240 years from the time of Muhammad. 240 years later, they finally get his sayings. Obviously, Al-Bukhari knew nothing about Muhammad. He was nowhere near. It didn't matter. He didn't really care. They're not interested in what happened historically. They're only interested in what the Abbasids were creating in Baghdad, not in Mecca, not in Medina, way up in Baghdad. So that happens around 870. And then on top of that, you still need the tafsir, you need the tahqiq, you still need the commentaries, and you still need the theology. Then you also need the history. That is introduced by Al-Tabari in 923. That's the 10th century. So by the 9th and 10th century, they now have the book, the man, the place, and the story. All 4 categories are now fulfilled, and a new religion is forming and growing. However, not within a 22-year period, but evolving from 200 to 300 years. Now, we still need to conclude, and that's what we're going to do with the last episode.
That's wonderful. And hopefully, folks, if you want to know just a summary of this entire series at the beginning, we did an introduction. And next time, you will watch our conclusion of the matter, of everything that we have presented. Now, you've heard Dr. J mention a date. That's the date when we are recording this, and it's June of 2021. And we've been doing this intentionally lately just to show that next time, if we have new findings, new research, something that needed to be clarified, we want to give you that date at that time so that no one can accuse us of saying, oh, you keep changing your mind. Oh, last time you said this. No. With the date now, you know, that's the evidence we have at hand. Next time we have something new, we'll say, hey, last time we said it this way, that was back in June of 2021. Next time, who knows what that date might be, December of 2021, which I'll have Dr. J, Lord willing, at that time, or maybe in 2022. We want to be careful, and we want to be faithful at the same time to what we presented to you, lest anyone accuses us of just fabricating things or changing our mind. We're not doing progressive, by the way, reinterpretation. The miracle of reinterpretation is not happening here. We are doing progressive revelations in terms of unearthing anything out there, and if it contradicts something we said, you know what? We will be glad to be the first to share it with you. So thank you again, everyone, for watching this. Thank you for all of your comments and interactions. Hopefully you've been enjoying this series. And next time, you will watch the conclusion of this entire series known as Mecca, In Search of a Place. Thank you, Dr. J. Thank you, everyone. God bless you. This is Al Fadi. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, CIRA International, and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.